Time of the year now, you got people falling in love. It brings you good cheer now when that mistletoe.
Hey y'all, I think I've finally narrowed it down. I've been thinking about it for quite a while, and I think I've finally decided on my 10 favorite books for the year. Favorite books 2022. Like, I've read a lot of graphic novels though this year. It was like sort of my year of getting into graphic novels. I've read loads and they were brilliant, loads of them. So I think I've made an executive decision here and I've decided to separate them out. So I'm gonna do one list of books, favorite books, and then another list of favorite graphic books. So today, just books, and I think another day in Vlogmas, maybe like tomorrow or the next day, whatever, we'll do a whole nother top 10 favorite graphic books, okay? So I'll start number 10, right? Number 10 favorite book, and then go upward toward 1, but I can only do half of them now because I'm gonna have to go, oh shit, I'm gonna have to go get my kid very soon. God, where does the time go? So I'll just do half now, and then later on I'll do the top 5, like the other half. Okay, so number 10 favorite book of the year. This is gonna be Cardiff Dead by John Williams. So I feel like it's a bit niche and maybe not a lot of people will want to read it because it takes place in Cardiff, in the city that I live in. And I think that's maybe a large part of why I liked it, but it's not the only reason. It's just a banging book all around. And if someone was living in, like, you know, Philadelphia or something completely removed from Cardiff, I feel like it would still be an enjoyable book, you know? So it takes place mainly in 1999, which is this year in Cardiff where they like just threw loads of money at infrastructure and everything, like whole new government buildings, whole new like Senate. They turned all the ports and everything that used to be really scruffy into this like really ritzy, like fancy bay area. And in the midst of like all this huge change, there's this group of people who have returned to Cardiff from wherever places for the funeral of a friend that they used to know, and like 20 years before then they used to all be in a ska band together. So like one of the guys in the ska band has died and they've all come back for the funeral. So it jumps between these sort of like 1999 and I think like 79 or whatever, like late 70s, early 80s, from like the now when they've all come back together and the then when they were all like really young and in this ska band. And it's really like character driven, so not a lot actually happens, but the characters are brilliant. Like they're really true to form, like just brilliant Cardiff based characters. Like the dialogue is amazing, like things they say to each other and just like conversations they have and they talk about stuff. Like it is just really well written, super funny, like quite heartwarming and like deep, and I just fucking loved it. It was brilliant. Okay, number 9 favorite book of the year. So this one is How Beautiful We Were by Mbue. So I read this for Book 2 prize and really liked it. So at the time, I don't think I made it my number 1. At the time, I liked it, but I don't think it had set in properly. So then sort of going back and thinking about it, and like all that time has passed and thinking about it, actually it was banging. It was one of my favorites. I loved it. It's basically about this sort of fictional town in Africa, this village basically, and they are slowly being poisoned to death by this American oil company that's set up next door. So their crops are being like killed off, and like their children are dying constantly due to sort of toxins in the soil and stuff like that. The country is run by some sort of like greedy dictator character, you know, so he doesn't care that the American oil companies are killing his people, like because the American oil companies are paying him quite a lot of money. So the village is sort of left on their own, you know, no one to stand up for them, so they have to stand up for themselves. And basically the whole book is told from the perspective, like the narrator is just a whole group of children, like a whole generation of lost children. And there's sort of one of the people, Tula, is sort of lifted up by them as like their rebellious leader as she sort of grows up and she goes to school in America and she learns about sort of like protest and dissent and stuff like that and standing up against governments and stuff like that. She leaves America then. America's like, stay, and she has a life there. And she's like, I can't, my calling is to take my knowledge now and go help my people. And it's just basically about a community fighting back against like the epitome of Western greed. Do you know what I mean? And the characters were brilliant, and like the the settings of this village and everything, and how the people are sort of willing to give up everything, like to sacrifice their whole identities for their community and stuff like that. It's beautiful. I just loved it. I wish that I'd ranked it higher in BookTube prize, actually. Okay, number 8 favorite book of the year is Winter Counts. I've decided it. It's by David Heska, Wambley Wyden. Okay, and I talked about this one earlier in Vlogmas, I think like on the 1st or something. Like I'll link that video below. Because I finished it very recently and it was so good, sort of thinking back on it now. Like I wish it was part of a series. I feel like it could be as well. Like the characters in it could easily like run the course of several different books. The idea is it's on this reservation, and I think South Dakota or North Dakota, something like that. And there's sort of thing as part of the reservation, like life just in general, that the reservation police aren't allowed to prosecute federal crimes. This is something I didn't really know about. I think I'd heard about it, but I didn't really know a lot about it, and I've gone through a gazillion Wikipedia rabbit holes since then, just fascinated by this. How the reservation police and sort of the courts and stuff to do with the reservation aren't allowed to prosecute sort of things like rapes and drug charges and stuff. They have to give it over to the FBI. And the FBI, because they've got a lot of things on their plates, you know, bigger things than that, and, you know, also probably like, you know, systemic racism fueled issues, they decide a lot of the time not to prosecute or to devote time and energy toward investigating things properly. So you get a lot of unprosecuted federal crimes on the reservation. So you sort of develop this vigilante culture, I guess, which is fucked up, but, you know, fair. So this guy, our main character, he's one of these vigilante dudes, you know, like you need justice to happen, but no one's going to provide justice for you. So you need to take, this guy needs to go and beat somebody up for you, you know, to let them know that you done bad, don't do it again, you know? And anyway, so his nephew, he's watching his nephew lives with him because his sister has died. And the nephew gets into drugs a bit, not because he's a bad kid, but because, you know, sometimes you just fall into these sort of like bad groups and stuff. And the vigilante guy, he's pissed. He's like, how fucking dare you give drugs to my nephew, you know? So he goes after these people that are bringing drugs onto the reservation, and he discovers that it goes like way higher and way deeper than he thought. But it was brilliantly crafted, and I love a sort of authority lawman type person who's like really honorable and has a really good heart and wants to do the best he can, but doesn't give a fuck about how things are supposed to be done, you know, like the corporate, like, you know, towing the line, must do the rules, blah, blah. Like he's a rule breaker and he's gonna get shit done and he's gonna find justice for people, but he's gonna do it in his own way. Oh, brilliant. Fucking love it. I want it to be a series. Okay. Number 7 favorite book of the year is Uncle Montague's Tales of Terror by Chris Priestley. So this is a kid's book, okay? I'm not gonna lie to you. This is marketed toward children, but also it scared the shit out of me because I read it partially in a tent and it's super creepy. Like Chris Priestley can set a vibe, okay? Like the creakiness, the spookiness, like the sort of chilling, like under vibe of the house, like scared the shit out of me, and I cannot believe it's a kid's book, but it is, okay? So basically the idea is there's this kid and he goes to his uncle's house every day in like the forest past these like silent children, and his uncle tells him stories, and it's sort of like he tells you the story. So, you know, first chapter is the story of this kid, you know, and it ends in this way and it's like creepy or whatever. And then you go back to the uncle, and the uncle and the kid are talking, and then the uncle's like, oh, that reminds me of another story, and he tells you another story, okay? But each of the stories that he tells has to do with some sort of object in his house or some sort of thing that the kid can see. You know, he's like, oh, it's about this object, and the kid can see that that object is there. So now the kid's like, is this a story? Or did this really happen? and there's like a creepy butler guy or like creature upstairs that's always knocking about that he's never seen, but who the uncle talks to all the time, like get us tea, you know, and he's like, and he's just missed him, he's gone. But like at the, I'm not gonna spoil like the ending, but the ending was just as creepy as all the stories. Like the stories, as he's telling them, get creepier and creepier, and the kid sort of starts to realize, actually, is this like real, you know? Chilling for children. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. And it's made me think I want to read way more Chris Priestley. So I downloaded, I think like 7 Ghosts or something from my Libby app, but I didn't get to it in time, and it was on hold for someone else, so it's gone now, and I'm pissed because I feel like that one will also be really good. Like 2023 might be the year I delve further into Chris Priestley. Okay, number 6 favorite book of the year is Summer Suns by Lee Mandello. This one was quite a chunker. It was massive, and it sort of almost put me off reading the book, but I'm super glad I did. The basis of this one is, it's this guy. He's, I guess, in his 20s or whatever. And years ago, he had like a really intense bonding experience with his friend, who's become basically like his brother, and they have a really strong attachment. So the brother goes away to university in this sort of like small sort of town with like quite a rich history, and he goes off to this town to study like sort of the folklore of it and sort of the history of it, and it's the founding families and stuff like that, and to do a degree sort of on like the folklore of that area. But while he's there, he dies, and so his friend, so that was Eddie. So Andrew, his like best friend or whatever, gets a call that he's died, and he's like, it was a suicide, blah blah, it doesn't make any sense. They're saying it's a suicide. He's like, nah, he's killed himself. So he goes to this place where he died to sort of figure out what's happened to him, and you sort of like learn things going forward about the 2 boys, like whatever happened to them when they were kids together, it caused them to have this like gift or curse or whatever to do with like being able to see ghosts or like specters or like haunts is what they call them. Like they're sort of momentarily haunted by presences, like they sort of grip them and all they can see are like these presences, like these sort of mini hauntings that then they sort of snap out of or whatever. And it was terrifying. It was absolutely chilling, these sort of like encounters with the haunts. And sort of as he's like investigating what's going on, blah blah, he meets the people that the dead guy sort of built his life around in this university community. He gets to know them. He sort of has a sort of weird relationship with one of the guys in the house that he knew. And basically the ending is brilliant. Like I love, there's sort of like an intricate sort of like dance between the folklore and the history that he was studying and what's happening now in the investigation, figuring out what happened to the guy. It was brilliant. Like the writing was so good, the characters so good. I just loved it. Okay, I gotta feed my dogs and get my kid from school, so I will pick this up, the top 5 for the year, when I get back. The Spudge and I splurged on like books from the charity shop. Okay, we got Christmases Around the World, Goosebumps, The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena. This was 49p. That wasn't even half a pound. Okay, then we got The Polar Express, which we've never actually owned before. I don't know if the Spud's even seen the movie or if she knows anything about this. I was sort of showing it to her and she's like, what? So we need to rectify that. And then this one, which was the vast majority of the amount that we paid. It's a full £10, which is crazy. But it's The Ghostbusters Volume 1. Ugh, we're definitely going to get stuck into that later. Okay. Top 5 books for 2022. Are you ready? Okay. Number 5 favorite book for the year. The Union of Synchronized Swimmers by Christina Sandu. So this one was originally written in Finnish, and the author, like the Finnish author, translated it herself from Finnish to English and like 5 other languages because she's brilliant. But it's tiny, mind. It's like a tiny novella with a bunch of sort of like 6 stories or something all interlinked. I think I read it for Shorty September. and it's amazing. Like, it goes forward and backward in time, and it's about these women who are from a sort of like unnamed Soviet state. And they go from being just sort of amateur river swimmers to sort of, I guess, accidentally becoming the national synchronized swimming team, and using that as a platform to defect. And like, I think like like a couple of the reviews and stuff I read were sort of saying that to say that they've defected is like a major spoiler, but I don't think it is. Like, I think it's, you know, like a big reason to read the book. Like, that's why I wanted to read it. I mean, like, it sets a really interesting sort of, you know, base for wanting to read it. Anyway, like, it starts out with like a woman who's living in another country, and she's dating this like weird bird man who's from the country she's from. Like, they both have the same home country and they've both left it for whatever reason. But she's like dealing with a lot of baggage to do with being from there and living in this new country. And she's just pretending to him like she's not from there. She's like changed her accent and everything about her, and they're speaking in this other language when really they could be speaking in both of their native language, but she refuses to admit to him that she's also from there. And it's just a bunch of sort of like weird vignettes like that, like that sort of deal with sort of belonging and identity and language, you know, sort of adapting your language, learning a new one, things to do with, I guess, accepting the inevitable, or like grass is greener type things. I don't know, I just thought it was really interesting. I did loads of like Wikipedia rabbit holing to do with it. Anyway, the writing was brilliant, characters are brilliant. I love it. Okay, number 4 is The Godmother by Hannah Lorcaire. So this one is translated from French into English, and it's also a shorty. I loved it. I also read it for Shorty September. So it's about this woman. She's like 53 or something, and she works as a translator for the French police, translating Arabic conversations through wiretaps primarily, but sometimes she does sort of serve as translator in the courts, like sort of like immigration court and things like that. So the way that translators are paid for the French police or whatever is sort of under the table, or like per job, like per contract. So there's no like long-term health, you know, benefits, or like no retirement or anything like that. So she's got money issues, and she's also like built up like a lifetime of resentment against the police and the state and the system and everything for how crap they treat these immigrants in court, you know, and how they don't give a shit about them, how they treat them like dirt. So she's like translating this conversation, this sort of wiretap, and she realizes that there's a bunch of drugs now, like in a field or whatever, and instead of telling the police that those drugs are there, she like acquires the drugs and then sort of infiltrates this like drug ring, and then becomes the godmother and like sells her own drugs, you know. And I think it's brilliant. Like the character of the godmother is a brilliant character. I love her. Like, she's I think quite like a 53-year-old woman in France, I think. So some of her ideas are a bit sort of backward, I mean, but in her heart, like, a lot of her anger and her resentment come from like the mistreatment of people by the system, you know. So she's not a terrible person, she's just quite sharp, you know, like quite dark, thinks sort of the worst of people, says sort of the worst about people, and she's just a really good character, I think, like really like sharp, I don't know, witty. Anyway, I thought it was brilliant. That was number 4. Okay, number 3 favorite book of the year is The Blue Tent by Richard Gwyn. So I also read this one in Dowithon because it's also sort of Welsh related. It takes place in Wales. I had a very good Dowithon, I think. That was a very successful Dowithon. This one is written by a guy who's a professor at the university that I work at. I work in the business school though, and he, I imagine, I think works in, you know, like the literature school, stuff like that. So I don't see him. I've never met him before. But I just like that he works at the university by me. And this book is amazing. It started me on a sort of minor obsession with Jorge Luis Borges, okay, and like the Aleph, and this idea of infinite worlds, like being able to see all possible worlds and all possible outcomes in worlds and stuff like that. So this guy, he inherits this house from his eccentric crazy aunt in Wales, in the country, and it's got this massive library in it, and it's like ancient texts and stuff, and she's left him like a message, like, you know, sort of like quite cryptic message about reading all the books. So he sort of takes it on himself. He quits his job and he just lives in this house and like reads the books all the time. Until this one day when this like random blue tent shows up in his yard and he's kind of fucked off about it. He's like of all the places in the country you could pitch your tent, like this is my yard, it's right next to my house, like come on. And that begins like this whole thing of it being like a magic blue tent where people keep popping out of it. Like first it's a girl, and then it's this random guy, and then it's another girl, and it turns out that all of these people think that they own the blue tent. They're like, what, that's my tent. He's like, it's not your tent, she showed up in the tent before. He thinks he's losing his mind. And you wonder as well, is he losing his mind? Because they make a big thing of this insomnia. So he's an insomniac, and all of his days sort of merged together, sort of separated in small bits by him like dozing on the sofa and stuff like that. Like his days don't have clear beginnings and ends. So you sort of wonder, is he a reliable narrator? Like, or whatever. Is this tent actually a magic tent? In the end, it's just a bit of a mind fuck. It just messes with your mind, and you think at the end, like, what is real? Are these things real? Did this happen? Did this not happen? What does this mean? Does this mean this? You know, and you just think about it for ages. And I loved it. It was brilliant. I haven't read anything else by Richard Gwynne, but I do have another one, Color of the Dog Running Away, that I found at a charity shop in my house. So that might be a priority for 2023. Okay, number 2 favorite book of the year. I'm going to go with The 5 Wounds by Kristen Valdez-Quaid. So I read this one for BookTube prize, and I put it top of my list for that category that time, but loads of people did not. Like, I can't even remember if it went through, or if it went through but like, you know, didn't go through to the next one or something. Like, I feel like this was fully underappreciated, but it was brilliant. So it's about this girl named Angel and her dad and her mom and her baby. So it starts out with her. She's living with her mother, and she leaves her mother's house. She's pregnant. She's like 6 months pregnant or something. She's 15 years old. She leaves her mother's house in a huff and goes to stay with her dad without warning him that he's coming, or warning him that she's coming. And the reason she leaves her mother's house is because her mother's boyfriend has acted toward her in a way that was really unacceptable. But the mother hasn't come to terms with it yet. She's still in her mind, you know, sort of siding with the boyfriend. So she goes to live with the dad, and the dad, like, is a fuck up. Like, he's crap at everything. He can't hold down steady jobs. He's always late for things, you know. He still lives with his mother. He's 33 years old. He doesn't have a job. And basically all of the characters, so Angel, the girl, the mom, the dad, the grandmother, they're all amazing characters. They're so fantastic. They're so well written. Like, there's so much like understanding of humanity and like empathy of fellow man behind that. Like, the author, I just feel like she must be an absolutely amazing person to have so much insight into like the human condition. So all of the characters, you sort of get in their heads, and they sort of justify why they do things. You know, they do bad things, they do good things, they have all this range of feeling, and you just basically fall in love with every single one of them, even the ones that are shit. Do you know what I mean? And it's just basically the whole family is living for themselves until now there's this baby, and now they're all living for this baby, like trying to be better people for the baby. And it sort of covers the span of basically the baby's first year of life or whatever. And it's just amazing. Like, I cannot believe it did not do better in the BookTube prize. Like, heartbreaking. I loved it. Okay. Number 1 favorite book for 2022 is Hex by Jenny Fagan. So this book is also tiny. I think I quite like tiny books. Books that are way too long, I feel like, I don't know, it's like a failure on the part of the author and the editor to like cut it down. I know that's awful. But I just love when a book sort of packs a punch, like a load of story into a small space. So this one, it's small. It's part of this Darkland Tales series, which also includes this other one called Rizzio by Denise Mina. When I went to Edinburgh to see some friends, I went to this like random Edinburgh bookshop and saw it and thought, oh, I'll get this as a souvenir, not really understanding what it was about. Holy shit, it's so good. Okay, so the idea is it's 15 something, it's like 16th century at some time, and Gaelis Duncan, who's a real witch in Scotland, based on how intensely I watch Outlander shows, I thought she was a made-up person, but apparently she is real. Gaelis Duncan was a witch, or accused of witchcraft in the 16th century in Scotland. So she's sitting in her prison cell, and she's awaiting her execution the next day, and she's thinking about how she was tortured for information, how she was beaten and abused, how she was tricked into saying that she's a witch and also this other person is a witch, you know, based on someone else's greed and manipulation. And this 21st century witch then visits her in prison, sort of through her mind. She like does like a mind like traveling thing where she's able to visit Geillis Duncan in prison, and then they chat about things. They chat about how women are treated in the 16th century versus the 21st century, and how it's very similar, how there's similar sort of hatred and violence toward women, you know, how a lot of the witch hunts and things still happen today, just in different forms, you know. It was quite like a sort of feminist sort of thing, and also just the author, I think, is a poet, first of all. She was first a poet and now she's an author, and it shows in her writing. It's so poetic and beautiful, and it just sort of sucks you in. Like, she's queen of a vibe. She's like giving us full like prison sentence, cold dark 16th century vibes, and then sort of this 21st century witch sort of sits with Geillis and like helps her to cope with this very last night of her life and all of like the fear and anxiety about going to be executed the next day. Oh, it hit me so hard. It was so good. And I think, like, of my top 3 or whatever, I think they really could be interchangeable as to which one was number 1, because I loved them all. But this one, Hex, so good. So good. Highly recommend. Highly recommend. Okay, that's the top 10. If you have any thoughts about this at all, or you just basically want to list for me in the comments your top 10 so that I can lightly investigate them and add them to some sort of impossible list for me to read in next year, please do that. Or let me know, you know, if you've read any of these, potentially hated them, love a bit of drama. Okay, it's Friday night. Kiddo and I are going to order a pizza. James is away. We can stay up anytime we want. We can stay up till 10:30. What?